What's up, everybody? It is Ebontis. We got another article today, kind of as expected. Yesterday, we got an update with a trailer for the weapons and exotics we might be seeing. As you guys can see, we've got a grenade launcher coming with some of the Lightfall loot that we're going to get. We've got new exotic armor, and if you haven't seen that video, check probably the end of the video, or you can click up here right now. Check out the other video on my channel, but I broke down basically the trailer for the exotics yesterday. Today, we got a preview for weapon tuning. And weapon tuning is going to hit some expected stuff. I think most people are going to expect it. And again, they're always kind of in the roller coaster of balance. Some things don't get used, they're trying to bring them up. Some things are like, everybody should use this, they're going to bring that stuff down. And we're going to go, it's the roller coaster of destiny. So if you're like, oh, they're breaking my wonderful weapon, welcome to the party. It's what we go through. Some things are good, some things are bad. We go on this cycle. So, weapon archetypes. They're working on a red reticle on PC. That's kind of one of those things I think basically just means an enemy is inside of your weapon's effective range, which I guess it's probably good to know that in general. And then in the future, they're going to work on color customization for reticles, which I've actually heard somebody ask for, so not a bad thing. Now we get to the nerfs. First one, linear fusion rifles. Now, if you didn't see this coming, I am sorry, but they are the thing that everybody uses. Whether it's Cataclysm, whether it's Taipan, whether it's... I can't even remember the one from Plunder. There's a lot of good linear fusion rifles out there, and they have been really, really strong. They hit hard, and you got a decent amount of ammo for the DPS. So they're trying to bring those down, especially for DPS. So they reduce the damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles by 15%. Now, 15% isn't nothing, but it doesn't kill everything that you've got. But it does mean your linears that are legendary, and then also your exotic linear fusion rifles that are not heavy are going to be weaker. They do state specifically, heavy linear fusion rifles do not get the buff. So Sleeper and Queenbreaker are unaffected. And it seems like Queenbreaker might be getting another buff, so we'll get there. Sleeper's still probably going to hit, though. Now, for my excitement, machine guns. Increased damage by approximately 10%. And basically what they did is they buffed the PvP base damage. And then everything in PvE is based on kind of a multiplier of that. So it's an overall damage buff by about 10%. And then they kind of have all of the time to kills in PvP a little faster, so they're basically about half a second, 0.47, 0.53, 0.50, literally averages to 0.5. And they also increase the ammo reserve economy. So that's going to be, it says 50% at 0 inventory. Now what that means is if take something like a high impact machine gun, that's going to be lower on, it's like the inventory is a background stat that we don't see. But again, high impact machine guns, they have less total bullets that you're going to hold versus like rapid fire. So you have like 250 versus like 500, give or take. Well, if you're on the low end, you're going to get about 50% more rounds. If you're on the high end, you're going to get about 20% more. But I mean, just an average between those for your machine guns, you're going to get about 30-35% more bullets on reserve. This is a good thing. Overall, machine guns are going to be more viable, a little bit more DPS, and I'm going to go through in-game some of the stuff you're going to want to consider thinking about. Heavy grenade launchers. Increased damage versus champions, mini-bosses, bosses, and vehicles by 20%. Minions by 40%. Miners, minions, basically the same thing. So, better boss DPS here. So, there's a couple to consider, but if you've got a, spike grenade launcher, going to be a good thing to hold on to. Miners, I would imagine, is more about the blast radius being effective on killing those, because they also buff the blast radius by 1. And they improve projectile collision, making it slightly easier to land hits. Because basically they state, you can miss with a grenade launcher. You have travel time. You have an arc to the thing. So grenade launchers, as ease of use, are not as easy. But if you can land your grenades, you should be putting out more damage. And should be doing better kind of across the board. So we'll look at a couple in-game, and I'll switch over to in-game. Shotguns, Legend of Acreus. This is all about like reticle. So shotgun reticles now change in size proportional to spread angle. Different shotguns, different spread angles, different barrels, and all that stuff. If you are a shotgun fanatic, probably go watch Fallout's video, or there's certain people who do shotguns. I am not that guy. Kinetic weapons. Now, this is an interesting one to think about. Kinetic slot weapons have always done 5% more damage versus unshielded PvE targets. So if you just have a normal guy and you shoot an auto rifle, like a 600 void auto rifle versus a 600 kinetic auto rifle, kinetic's going to do 5% more. Always has. That means the kinetic slot stasis weapons were straight up better, with extra functionality and no downside. Well, that's going away, but they wanted to give players more of a reason to use kinetic damage type weapons. Now, there's another thing we'll think about here in the bottom. Kinetic primary weapon damage multiplier from 1.05 to 1.1. So you get about a 5% buff. Approximately, it's like 4 point something. But it's about a 5% buff to primary kinetic weapons. There's a few I want to mention. We'll get there. Kinetic special weapons, 1.05 to 1.15. So that's like 9.5, almost a 10% buff on kinetic specials. There's not a ton of those, but there's a couple. Kinetic slot stasis weapons no longer have the 5% damage bonus versus unshielded targets in PvE. Now, things are going to have shields. Match game is not going to be a thing we really have to worry about as much in high-end activity, so shields aren't going to be as detrimental, but your stasis weapons won't be quite as strong. 5% you're probably not even going to notice if you're an average player, so don't think it's like, oh no, my disparity is going to suck now. You're not even going to probably feel the difference. Like, the amount of times you got to pull the trigger to kill some of these enemies, you're never going to know. But it is just, it had a bonus that others didn't, so they're balancing the scales. Now, this one's interesting. They state there's also a kinetic damage type perk coming in Lightfall. Now, the way I would picture a kinetic damage type perk is going to be anything along the lines of like Jolt, Volatile, Incandescent. They said there's going to be one for Strand, and Kinetic is apparently getting one too. So, Kinetics, depending on the role, which means you're also probably going to be looking for new weapons. Also theoretically going to have something cool coming with it. Exotics. They wanted to get a lot more of the subclass 3.0 verbs in with some of the exotics, so they're kind of going along with that. And a lot of things kind of got a buff with it. Most things. One thing at the end is a nerf, but most of this is basically a buff. So Queensbreaker, shots now chained to nearby enemies. Now the only way I can read that is jolting. It doesn't specifically say it here, but that's the only way I can picture chaining. Is a jolting. It is an arc weapon already, so it makes sense. And it already blinds. So it says shots now chained to nearby enemies, so I would imagine it jolts. And it uses arc 3.0 blinding, which means if you're considering build crafting, it also is now an unstoppable weapon. So it is going to, if it blinds, then it will intrinsically stop an unstoppable champion. So Queenbreaker also not unaffected by the nerf to linear fusion rifles. So depending on how everything works out with Jolt, Blinding, Unstoppable, and a heavy weapon, it's got potential. Is it going to be the be-all, end-all? No, but it's actually got some possible uses. Next thing we've got is going to be Ruinous Effigy. Basically the sphere that you run around and dunk. That one is going to now suppress. So if you're running around with Ruinous Effigy and you got one of the dunk balls, weird sentence, but it's going to suppress whatever is in the blast radius, which is not a horrible thing, but excuse me. I don't know if it's going to be that good, but we'll see. Leviathan's Breath. I don't know if I'm going to pull this out yet, but it has potential now. So on a perfect draw, it will now apply Volatile. That's a good thing. Increase the damage to one hit kill all PvP supers. If you're good enough to do that with that weapon, more power to you. But again, base damage going up. Increase damage versus champions by 30%. Now that's big, because theoretically it already hits hard. You pull once, it might even apply Volatile if you can get the perfect draw and you stun a champion. Get your second draw on the unstop, probably going to hit like a truck. So I don't know if it's going to be amazing, but shout out to Sammy Cat and those people who love their bows. Your Leviathan's Breath is getting better. 1,000 Voices. Each explosion now applies 10 plus 5 with Ember of Ashes, so keep that in mind. Scorch Stacks. If you're running this build, you're probably going to want to run Ember of Ashes, and they said landing a full burst on a single target will trigger an ignition immediately. And also remember, an ignition will cause an unstoppable champion to be stunned, so your first, like, theoretical, full shot of 1,000 Voices could stun an unstoppable champion. Second one would probably delete it if you're going into some activities. So again, gives more flexibility in what you can do with it. Sunshot was a top candidate for applying solar subclass verbs. So now Explosion on kill applies 10 plus 5 Scorch Stacks. And the plus 5 is Ember of Ashes, so they just probably assume you're running that one. Polaris Lance. That is going to be a beast. Perfect 5th shots now apply plus 40 plus 20, again with the Ember, stacks instead of a custom burn. So now it applies Scorch. If you're hitting precision shots, you get just infinite ammo, basically, and every 5th shot is going to hit that thing. So Polaris Lance pretty good, but the honest surprise of the entire thing, Two-Tailed Fox had tough competition as a heavy weapon, but Now it's the only weapon that can apply subclass verbs from multiple damage types without extra steps. Solar rockets now apply 60 plus 30. Now, why it's not 60 plus 40 and just causes an ignition, I don't know. That would just be too good, but it applies scorch stacks. Basically, with Ember, it's going to be 90, so you're damn near there. The Void Rocket already applies suppression, and this is the new one. The Catalyst, which we don't have, but we will be getting apparently next season, completes the trifecta. Now, my assumption, you can assume with me if you want to, the Catalyst completes the trifecta. The trifecta would be your light subclasses, so Solar, Void. We're talking about Arc. We have a couple options. We have a blinding option. Theoretically, could be a thing. It could also jolt a target. Now, you're already suppressing a target, so I feel like blinding is kind of redundant on top of it. Maybe not, but maybe just really shut him down. If it jolts it, that would actually be really cool. If you fire it at one target, hits them, and then jolts and maybe clears out some other guys with the blast radius too. Basically, everything's going to be dead in one certain area. But Two-Tailed Fox, if the Catalyst gives it 3 rockets, I don't know if the reload speed is going to still make the DPS bad, but 3 rockets with that thing, it could have some fun uses. That's all I got to say is Two-Tailed Fox, you know, tuck it away, make sure it's reasonably leveled up. It might actually be fun to use. Actually, don't worry about leveling anything because they're probably going to raise the floor of every single piece of gear up to like 1600. They've done it before, and that's my guess that's going to happen. They'll say it later, but yeah, I wouldn't infuse too much right now. Save the materials. Prometheus Lens, added incandescent, kind of perfect with the Catalyst. Grand Overture, basically the Catalyst now uses the arc blinding effect. So again, for whatever reason, if you want to with Grand Overture, you'll be able to use the arc blind. Again, also should work with Unstop. So we got a lot of blinding in here. Not too much on everything else. Hipfire reticles, they are working on certain things. If you want to get into reticles, that's fine. That's more of a PvP thing. They did get a few changes to perks. Osmosis now works with Strand. Strand is going to have its own things. We've got Tangles and Threadlings and all that stuff going on. Still didn't get our Strand article this week, which I expected. Guess that's going to be next week. Elemental Capacitor also works with Strand. Airborne Effectiveness, which honestly makes probably the most sense of some of those things I've seen. So, Strand, Weapon, if you're running a Strand subclass and you have Elemental Capacitor, you'll be more effective in the air. And if you're grappling all over the place, then, you know, that's not a bad thing. Rewind Rounds, that is a perk that is basically only on the Vault of Glass weapon set, will now be available, and they're going to be putting it on more weapons. So Rewind Rounds has potential. I've actually got a weapon with that, so we'll take a peek. Eager Edge, apparently there was an issue with that perk. You have to love live recordings, that's all I got to say. Apparently it's fixed. I don't know, some people are, I saw it on Twitter. I don't worry too much about like flying across the world with that thing. Some people do. If you do, cool. Hopefully it's better. Now, this is my sad point. Blinding grenades on grenade launchers don't do arc damage. Most of them don't. So it's not appropriate for them to trigger Arc 3.0 blinding effects. We didn't feel the need to change the disorient effects, though, so we've updated the name to Overlap Less, renamed blinding grenades to disorienting grenades. Now, the only problem with this is blinding grenades, if you are going to blind, you could blind an unstoppable champion with any blinding grenade launcher. Breach load all over the place. We've got options. Unfortunately, now that is seemingly off the table. So I don't really, this is probably the one I don't agree with the most, because I know there's like nerfing and balancing and all that stuff, and we'll get to the next one here in a second. But this one, there's not a whole lot of uses for blinding grenades in the first place. So if you're going to take the ability away for me to get the blinding effect that works on champions from these things, and you're going to take it away, you're giving me less and less uses for these breach load grenade launchers in a PvE situation. So a little frustrating on my part, and I know I may sound annoyed, but that's just an option I was looking forward to for, again, we have a lot of blinding effects. If you go into a PvE activity with a grenade launcher that has blinding on it, you are going for a very specific purpose, because blinding does not hit that hard. It's like a very baby blast radius, doesn't do that much. It's not that strong even. It doesn't hit hard. So you went for one reason. The fact that they're taking that away, kind of a bummer. Makes the perk very much less useful in my opinion. So it still has some benefits to it, but man, it's just like, it doesn't seem like it was necessary to make this change. I don't know if they'll ever revert it, but that's just one of those things I feel like kind of a missed opportunity. The final one, Vice Stinger. If you didn't expect this one, it's kind of not surprising. So Vice Stinger is one of the most desirable origin traits because it will reload your gun, and it will do it fully. So this was typically a full reload when the perk activated. Now, it only reloads 25% of the magazine. So it's not going to give you like a full magazine back, especially on something like Taipan. It's only, or Reed's Regret, or Tarantula. There's a lot of Vice Stinger linear fusion rifles, which was probably where it got abused, but it's only going to be 25% of the magazine. So, sadly, yeah, this is definitely a nerf. So, but Vice Stinger is nice. Also, picture something like Funnel Web. You're not going to be getting the full magazine back now. So that one with Subsistence and Vice Stinger could nearly fire forever. You're going to have to do some reloading at this point. So, if you are looking to use any of these types of weapons for solo flawless activities, cough, cough, hint, hint, do them before Lightfall because these changes are coming. They say in the future they've got some other changes to charge meters for exotics, perk counters, and all those other things. They're working on like hip fire reticles and the full auto melee, which I still don't understand, but it's for accessibility, so that's fine. And that's most of what we got. Now, I'm going to go quickly into game. I know this is already a somewhat long video, but I just want to cover a couple of things just to give you guys some things to think about. Okay, so the first thing is linear fusion rifles, Sleeper Simulant, and Queenbreaker. So Queenbreaker already fires a long-range precision arc bolt that blinds enemies. Now again, the chaining effect, I have to imagine it jolts too. But the Arc 3.0 now does the true blinding effect, which will be unstoppable. So it's unstop and jolting. Theoretically, also overload if the jolt comes into play. I don't know if they're going to count it that way, but if they don't, again, this thing needs some love. Please give it jolt and blinding. Could be pretty solid. Sleeper Simulant. It already hits like a truck most of the time. This is not getting nerfed like other linear fusion rifles, so theoretically could be strong. Machine guns. Ones to consider. Thunderlord. Xenophage. Heir Apparent. And Grand Overture. Those are probably your big ones. Grand Overture got another option too. Machine guns are getting about a 10% DPS buff and ammo reserves. So Xenophage might get like, I don't know, 2 bullets. Probably not many, I promise you. Actually, if it's 50%, and that thing is probably very low, I think the max that thing peaks out is like 32. If it can get up to like 40, something like that would be amazing. So this is definitely one to consider. Thunderlord. If this thing gets like a reserve ammo already, because it can reload itself, lightning rounds, overload champions, Thunderlord's got some massive potential. Heir Apparent, I don't know if it's as strong in the DPS world, but it's there. And then Grand Overture, we already know that got multiple things. It got the buff to 10%, because it's just that. And then also Grand Overture now is going to, with the catalyst, missiles explode will blind combatants. Those defeated by missile impacts will then explode. So now the explosions are going to be blinding, which should be unstoppable, especially since it's arc, that will be in effect. The next one is after machine guns, we get to heavy grenade launchers. They will be 20% stronger against bosses. I don't know if this is going to be like a god tier weapon. Still probably not. Prospector, sad, but I don't know if it'll ever be that good. That being said, being able to basically go full auto and dump the entire thing in the release and detonate everything together, you have a chance at some DPS on this one because it's going to go doof, 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 and then you release and they explode. Possibly some decent damage. I don't know if it's going to be good. You know, people are going to be doing DPS testing, just stuff to think about, because when it comes to grenade launchers, I can tell you the Colony is not going to be your DPS god tier weapon. Just not. It's not even going to be a thing. And Anarchy, theoretically, that is getting a 20% buff. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's not. It's not getting any jolting or any verbs like that, but it is possibly getting a 20% buff. We shall see. Shotguns, that's all reticles. Kinetic weapons. Now, this is some stuff to think about. Primary ammo, about 5% buff. Special weapon ammo, about 10% buff. Special weapons, you've got Izanagi's Burden. That one could get about 10% more DPS. Some people like getting that rotation with a heavy legendary weapon could be good. Arbalist is already getting the 15% nerf. So the 10% that it gets, it's probably going to feel about the same. But it technically won't take too bad of a nerf. Lawrence Driver actually will get more of a nerf than this one. That's your special weapons that I can really think about. Witherhoard, it's not getting the buff. Bastion is another one. That's going to get about a 10% buff. But your kinetic primary weapons to think about. All of this stuff, obviously. But your big ones like Wishender, this thing already hits hard. Going to get about 5% stronger. I mean, Huckleberry for mowing down ads. You've got Outbreak, technically. That one could have some little bit. That one could get about 5% stronger. And just a lot, like Revision Zero. We already know it's pretty good. Barrier Champion, you got your 2 alternate fire options. And Revision 0, still, again, getting a little bit of a buff. So you've got those. Exotics. We already talked about Queenbreaker. It's getting Blinding. It's getting possibly, it says some type of chaining. I have to assume Jolt. It just doesn't say it, so I still worry. Ruinous Effigy. That's going to be getting Suppression when you dunk the orb. Leviathan's Breath. I will be curious. It's already an unstoppable weapon. You've got the full draw knockback. Now it's going to do 30% more to champions. Applies Volatile on a perfect draw. And then the damage goes up so you can one hit in PvP. So if I think it's hunters that have the perfect draw exotic. If you have that, this thing could literally be volatile on every perfect draw. So potential. 1,000 Voices. You know that thing's going to be doing Scorch. Sunshot is going to be doing Scorch. Prometheus Lens is going to be doing Scorch. Polaris Lance. This is the one to consider, actually. Precision hits return ammo to the mag. So you just... infinite ammo if you're not missing. Landing 4 precision loads the next solar explosion round, which is now going to apply a pretty good chunk of Scorch, and you just keep firing. So Polaris Lance for just like kind of a guaranteed DPS potential. And then Grand Overture, again, that one's getting the blind. So that's most of the weapons to think about. I mean, every kinetic is getting about a 5% since it's primary. But like Revision 0, it's getting a 5% buff. That's not a bad thing. If you switch over to the DPS option, it's a barrier weapon. There's just some things to consider. Dead Man's Tail, you know, not amazing in PvE, but if you want to use it, it's a little bit better. Honestly, Quicksilver Storm, for one, it's going to be a strand weapon, I'm pretty sure. So it's probably not really going to be kinetic. But this thing we already know is going to make tangles when you get a kill with the grenades. It's already a pretty good weapon with the consecutive... you know, the landing multiple hits turns your next shot into a homing rocket. Quicksilver Storm, definitely a good one. If you pre-ordered it, have fun when you log in. I think that's basically everything right now. They haven't touched anything with regards to armor exotic nerfing or changes yet. Maybe that's coming in a future one. But for now, think about what weapons you want to be using. Because again, we're only going to have 10 days before the raid and all the stuff that's coming. So that is this week's update. This is mostly sandbox tweaks for weapons. If you guys enjoyed this one, drop a like below. Leave a comment if you got questions. And for all of you guys, hope to see you in the next one. We will have the podcast tomorrow night, right here on YouTube, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's just me and Cognito. So back to the old Flashpoint days, just because Travis is busy and we don't have a guest. So we'll be chopping it up about all of this stuff and whatever happens in the TWAB. See you guys soon. Have a good one.